Why does this defendant get out of the car if he thinks that Trayvon Martin is a threat to him? Why? Why? Because he's got a gun. He's got the equalizer.
How many what-ifs have you heard from the state in this case? Well, I don't think, anyway, they don't get to ask you that. I don't think they get to say to you, what do you think? No, no, no. No, no, no. What have I proven to you? What have I convinced you beyond a reasonable doubt occurred in this case, so much so that you don't have any reasonable doubt as to those issues that I presented to you?
The prosecution and defense brought closing arguments in the murder trial of George Zimmerman, a trial which received wall-to-wall media coverage, something critics thought was a bit too much. CNN became a big target. Variety's Brian Lowry. Thursday's closing argument raised the already simmering coverage toward a boil and evoked the customary empty-headed questions from CNN's Wolf Blitzer, who kept asking a panel of lawyers to guess at what is going to resonate with these women, referring to the all-female jury. Mr. Lowry went on to refer to HLN's Nancy Grace as their toxic avenger. So what do you think about this, Rick? Fox obviously has provided a great deal of coverage, but CNN has been slammed for going over the top, excessive.
Look, I think the coverage is all too much. You know, unfortunately, this is a terrible tragedy that happens pretty regularly in America's cities, and this should have been more of a regional story. But let's be honest, race was interjected very early on by the President of the United States. And we defined this issue in terms of race, and now it's, you know, in terms of white-black, because he's considered a white Hispanic by some news networks. I think at the end of the day, most people just are going to watch the verdict this coming week simply because the media has made it an emotional plea, but they don't much care about it. And I hope that Russell Simmons is wrong when he says that justice is going to come to Zimmerman one way or the other, and all of the people really creating havoc with this upcoming decision really should calm down.
The National Review claims that the New York Times invented a new rubric, as your magazine put it.
Yeah, ordinarily he would be Hispanic, but for purposes of this case, he's a white Hispanic. But I disagree with Rick, and I suspect some of my other colleagues here. This is a newsworthy trial. It's fascinating to watch, number one. Two, there's been so much social and political capital put onto this case that it is inherently newsworthy. And three, we're learning how so much of the early media coverage was deeply flawed because it bought into the racial metaphor here, the racial morality tale, and the more facts we learned in the actual trial, which was broadcast directly to people, the more we learned that wasn't true.
What about the arguments, that, and many are making them, that this trial should not be covered? Let's get cameras out of the courtroom.
No, I actually, believe it or not, it's going to surprise people because I usually don't like this kind of stuff. I agree with Rich. I think that it's not to me even the race issue as much as it's the sort of gun control issue. I think a lot of people are looking at this as there's the camp that thinks that, you know, George Zimmerman needed to defend himself even though he was tracking this kid down. And then there's other people like me who think I don't want the George Zimmermans of the world like shooting me because they don't like that my hoodie's up. You know, so but I do think that this is a really serious issue in the country, you know, the gun control issue, and that people want to see, you know, how is this going to play out and what really happened? Because I agree, the coverage early on was very speculative and definitely in one direction.
It has been pointed out that if George Zimmerman had gone by the name of Jorge Mesa, which was his mother's maiden name, this case might not have gotten the attention that it did.
Right, that would have been just an underclass back and forth shooting like happens in Chicago 10 or 20 times a weekend. Look, I agree that the media were fortunate, or Zimmerman was badly advised on PR to go with George Zimmerman because it became a white Hispanic versus a black. Then, as Rich wrote in another piece this week, the media get to pretend this. The media get to pretend that America is still Mississippi in the 1950s, and this is the Emmett Till case, and it's just not so. But I think the media and the New York Times has been far and away the most guilty on this, of trying to say, listen, if you don't hear the word race every 5 seconds in the trial, well, read the New York Times and we'll put it in for you.
One of the concerns, obviously, is that the media have fanned racial arguments or racial concerns, racial tensions about this case. One of our favorite cartoonists, A.F. Bronco, created this to drive that point home. Take a look at that, and you get some sense of his take. Did the early involvement of some of the big names in race relations in this country, in this case, did they drive the coverage?
Of course they did in the beginning, and I think there is a paradox here in that this was a case that really was driven by social media in the beginning. Tweeting, Facebook, interest that propelled the Florida police, to take another look at it. But, when Ariana Huffington writes this week, wall-to-wall coverage is not the way to honor the memory of Trayvon Martin. Well, this is not about honoring anyone's memory. This is about a search for justice, and Americans have always been fascinated by such trials, as David Falkenflik pointed out on NPR this week.
I can think of 3 more important trials: Fort Hood, Tsarnaev's, and the Whitey Bulger case. All are more important trials.
And they're not getting
right, exactly,
the coverage.